Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Michael Wann. He's a researcher, artist, storyteller, astrologer, and creator of SusquehannaAlchemy.com. His research dives into the esoteric history of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and the hidden nature of the Susquehanna River, one of the oldest rivers on the planet. Michael, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. You've done some fascinating research on the Susquehanna River, its origins, its ties to magic, rituals, possibly secret societies, and links to the technological age and where we're going. And you also look into the nature of our reality and how we interact with our environment through magic. Where did this all begin for you? Let's start with your story.
All right, that's a nice place to begin. So I live in Marietta, Pennsylvania. It's on the western border of Lancaster County, probably 90 miles west of Philadelphia and maybe an hour north of Baltimore, if you can imagine that in your mind. And so it's this tiny little river town. I moved here right after my wife and we split up. And so I moved away for a little bit and then I moved back because I have two young children. It was important for me to be back. And so my ex-wife, she found me this apartment across the street from where the boys go to school. And at first I was like, I don't want to live in this place. Like it was like this creepy old building, and I did not have a positive connotation when I first moved here. But then I started noticing all of these kind of like, just like I pay attention to the details in the background of life. And I'm seeing all this stuff happen. And like, you know, I'm going through some really, really intense things in my life. I literally moved into this apartment just serendipitously, you know, I say with quotation marks, of my Uranus opposition going direct, like the exact month. So all this stuff's lining up and all my life is real heavy. And this is a river town, and it's got this fantastic like trail, which is 15, 20 miles long, which hugs the river. And I was riding my bike up and down it, and you know, just processing just life. And I just got curious about the river, and I was like, you know, I don't know what this river is. I didn't grow up in this area, and so I went to Wikipedia, and you know, Wikipedia's got like a lot of, you know, it's Wikipedia. It's got a lot of stuff about it, which isn't necessarily the greatest, but it also has some things which are great, which is your ability to go and navigate through a lot of information very quickly. And that's where it all began. So it was like very much tied into my personal story. And what's most interesting is the Susquehanna mystery is, you know, that's kind of like the general term I use for it. It has an epicenter. Like when you look at all of the information, you look at all the clues that are given, they like keeps pointing to this one spot. This spot is the 40th parallel at the Susquehanna River. And, you know, I'm figuring this out. Like, you know, this mystery is unfolding, and I'm like, this is exactly where I live. I'm literally at 40 degrees and 15 minutes on the Susquehanna River. So it's like there's this like kind of gonzo journalism, gonzo research, if you will. Like not only am I researching this, but I'm living it. Like, you know, it's part of my life. And so the story is very integral to my own journey. And the reason why I'm saying that right now, is I indicated that this began, like, you know, prior to me moving into this apartment, you know, I knew what the Susquehanna River was because I've crossed it, but I had no idea like the way I would know it as I do now. And this interview, which I'm doing with you, it marks probably like my last week in this apartment. I'm moving out. So in terms of like a marker in my own life, like I'm recognizing like, you know, the bookmarks, you know, this is when it began and this is where it's ending. So it's like, it's a pleasure to talk about it right now. It's been a while since I've had the pleasure to be on the podcast. So I'm excited to go as deep as you want to.
Oh, awesome. Very cool. Well, let's start with the history of the river as far as it goes with your research. Tell us about first, where does it get its name?
Uh, all right. So you've got two things which we're working with. We've got like what I call Wikipedia history, like this is the history you're supposed to know, and then you've got like more of the like the murky history. And the murky history requires both like an awareness of many different unrelated sort of disciplines, and then the ability to kind of tie things together. So there's like a poetry in it. But so we're going to begin with the Wikipedia. So the Susquehanna River, if you're a listener and you don't know where it is, it's in Pennsylvania and New York. And if you're probably not from those states, you may not be familiar with it. But there's another part of the Susquehanna River which goes by another name, which you possibly may know, and that's the Chesapeake Bay. So when I'm talking about the Susquehanna River, I'm talking about the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is the bottom part of the river, which was it's an estuary. It's where fresh water meets the ocean. So the Susquehanna River, it got its name back with the very establishment of the colonies in North America, the British colonies, which eventually became, the United States. And so this is Jamestown, the Jamestown settlement. And if you think about it, the Jamestown settlement is the first colony of the British Empire. Britain had some other colonies, but this is when they're really stepping out. So Jamestown as a symbol, as a resonator, is both the beginning of the British Empire, which goes to become the biggest empire in the world, and arguably it's still, running the show, or at least in North America, and the United States. So this is the beginning point, and it began with Jamestown. And Jamestown is probably best known to a lot of people through the Pocahontas Disney story. It's based upon some element of truth, but the hero, if you will, in that is John Smith, the leader of Jamestown settlement. My personal opinion is I'm very open to the idea that John Smith as a name is like a nod, wink, wink, that it's someone else. Because John Smith is the British legal name for like an unnamed person, like we would say John Doe in America. And so once you understand the language of the people behind all of the the information we're going to get to, they work very punny that way. They're very kind of like tongue-in-cheek. So anyway, so John Smith, there's a document known as the John Smith Map of Virginia. Came out in 1612. It's a map of the Chesapeake Bay, Susquehanna River, and it is from that document that the river got its name, the Susquehanna. And the reason why I say that is prior to that, the river had like 100 names, like 100 different people had 100 different names for this river. But it was at that point the river was named, it was written, and from that point on, that it was always known as the Susquehanna. So the word itself is said to be an Algonquin word, the language of a lot of like the natives that were living in the Northeast, the Iroquois Nation, the Susquehannocks, all the people who they would speak the Algonquin language. And the Wikipedia, excuse me for a moment, the Wikipedia definition is that it means like muddy water, the river of muddy water, the oyster water. Like it's got a couple different sort of different definitions of what it means, and that's usually what's given as the like this is what the name means. But if you dig a little bit deeper, and I think you like to dig a little bit deeper, you're familiar with a lot of the research which shows that there was a strong Celtic influence and population living in North America. And we can see that from a couple different ways, like going really far back, like thousands thousands of years to just like maybe something a little bit more recent. But regardless, one of the way we know that through rock carvings, but one of the other ways is through the language. And what we see is there's a lot of Algonquin words which are phonetically very, very similar to Gaelic words, which is the language of the culture, the Celtic culture, and they have the same meaning. And so this is very, very common within new rivers that we find in the Northeast. And you'll see examples of it. It's usually like, you know, this river means of white rock and this river means of white rock. And the point I'm trying to make is there's a precedence. There's a precedence with these rivers, these Algonquin named rivers with maybe a Gaelic connection. And I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to be like, all right, so there's this other river back when before the Roman invasion, when the Celtic culture was fully thriving within the parts of the continent of Europe. And within what we now think of France, which used to be known as Gaul, there was a river. And it was like the Celtic population, or the Celtic culture, like other cultures, they recognized that there was a relationship between like spirit or divinity or some sort of transcendental type of higher entity, if you will, and water. And they always tied it to a goddess. And so like every stream, every lake, every well would have a goddess tied to it, and there'd be a hierarchy. And the height of the hierarchy was known as the Susquehanna River. And so that river is now known as the Seine River. It's the river that goes through Paris. So now, when we begin to look at the definition of the word Susquehanna, and it's funny, we haven't even talked about anything. If this is brand new to someone, you're like, why are you getting so into this name? It's like, it's all of the information, which is why this name is going to make sense. But there's a phonetic resonance with the word Susquehanna and Susquehanna. And back in the days of Gaul, the Susquehanna River was like the epicenter. It was the healing center where people traveled for hundreds of miles because they got something out of it. And that was the goddess Susquehanna, who was the highest goddess, the goddess of the earth and the water and magic. And that river is now, that name at least, is now tied to the Susquehanna. And the people who named it, John Smith, and the people who are behind that map have a very strong connection within the priest class, if you will, of the Celtic culture, you know, the Druids. And so you're beginning to see like all of the, like when you see the big picture, all of these details begin to like, it's almost like a stereogram, a magic eye piece of art where like at first, like, what am I looking at? What am I looking at? And then you're like, oh my, this is what I'm looking at. And so this, what we just described was like one small detail, but when you understand and see like the whole picture, it's like, wow, that's a big detail.
Definitely. And when it comes to the more magical and I guess you could say ritualistic aspects of this river, when does that come into play? I know that John Dee was involved with this. I'm fascinated with that. For those that aren't familiar, could you tell us a little bit first about who John Dee was and then how he got involved with the Susquehanna River and everything that's surrounding that?
Okay. What I'd like to do is first maybe like paint a bigger picture of what this magical ritual is, and then I'm going to go and answer specifically to John Dee. So this is like the ultimate conclusion based upon this mountain of evidence, and it's that the ancient practice of river goddess worship was done on the Susquehanna, or the river, which we're now called the body of water, because we want to get out of our mind, like, you know, the name is it. This is a body of water which now has a name associated with it. And and maybe that name is very, very significant, but I also want to be able to separate. So this body of water, which is quite possibly the oldest river on the planet, and it was a 400-year ritual for the purpose of ushering in a certain expression of the age of Aquarius. Like, this is all tied to the managing of the turning of the ages, you know, if you're familiar with what I mean by that. So that being said, this is a 400-year plan, and 400 is very significant. It coincides exactly with like the final piece of the last section of the Mayan calendar, the 13th Baktun, the last 390 some years, corresponds with this 400-year period, which is the beginning of the British Empire to what appears to be the closing, because 400 from a Kabbalistic perspective, using gematria, just like, you know, the simple code of alphanumeric, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Tav, has a Kabbalistic value of 400 and means completion. And so when we begin to look at all of the people who are behind the world firsts that have happened on this river, and we begin to understand their language and the way they do things, primarily from a Kabbalistic perspective, we're like, okay, this is what's going on. So that being said, it begins with John Dee. So John Dee is, if this is the first time you've ever heard of him, you know him best as a combination of Merlin from King Arthur, maybe the wizard from the Lord of the Rings, and James Bond. He's got a James Bond quality as well. And so this is like late 1500s, he was the advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. He was her astrologer. He was said to be the smartest man in all of Europe. He had the biggest library, and he is the father of what's known as Enochian magic. And so John Dee is commemorated by a lot of popular authors, and it's usually done in some sort of coded way. And so when we see Merlin, and we see there's a character in a Shakespearean play who's based upon John Dee, we see that, and that's John Dee because he was also this wizard character, but he also was the Queen's spy. And so this is very important to realize that from the very beginning of state-sponsored spycraft begins with John Dee. And he was also a magician. And that separation has never occurred, or has never happened. You know, they're still together. It might not be so obvious, but when we think of the influence of state-sponsored espionage and their influence on life, we tend not to think about it now being magically connected. But John Dee, where it began, is the original 007. He used to sign his letters to Queen Elizabeth 007, or at least that's one interpretation. Another interpretation is it's two balls and a cane, as in Tubla Cain. But regardless, like, that's where Ian Fleming, as he tells the story of James Bond, the 007, License to Kill, you know, read that any way you want. That's the correlation which is being put out there. That's who we have John Dee. So, all right. So, how does he tie into the river? So, John Dee, there are two Wikipedia ways, and then there's one which is more of like just a common a conclusion, which it just makes common sense to make if you know the storyline, which we're reading from. So, first, the Wikipedia. So, John Dee is the man who coined the phrase the British Empire. And it was very, very important. He believed in his heart, or at least this is how he's portrayed through history, that John Dee, like, he's a controversial character, definitely. He's been cast as the best and as the worst. So, you know, you do come up with your own opinion. But he has like that reputation. So John Dee is said to have, of his life mission, what he felt in his heart, that the Lord has endowed Britain this holy right to control the planet. And so that's why they wanted to have the British Empire. It was like, this is our destiny as told by God. And he believed it in his heart, and he believed it was the best thing from his planet. That's the narrative. And so when we then look at Jamestown as the first manifestation of the British Empire, there's a link, okay? So it's like we can imagine it's an idea with John Dee, and then it is established under the next monarch with Jamestown. So John Dee is also said to have been the Grand Master of the Order of the Rosy Cross. He was like the chief Rosicrucian. And there are a lot of people who are said to be a chief Rosicrucian. So it's like, I take everything with Rosicrucianism with a grain of salt. But he said that, and on the John Dee website, the official website of the John Dee Society, like they list that very clearly. He was the head of it. So John Dee has also this Rosicrucian connection, and that's where we begin to understand the linkage to the turning of the ages, because that's one of the responsibilities, if you will, of these secret societies, is to manage life on earth so that it is in a reflection to the story in the heavens. It's always been the case. That's why, like, the Bible was written the way the Bible has. It's the same group of people with different names which write the story of history, and then ensure that life lives out and reflects it. You know, that's how it's done. You know, there are people that do that. You know, whether they're people or something else, I don't know, but that's how our life works, at least. So John Dee, we know, connects to Jamestown, because Jamestown is the beginning of the British Empire, the first manifestation of John Dee's magical operation, if you will. Now, the second way he connects is that he is also the first man to ever apply geometry to navigation. And so if you ever can think of, like, you know, a movie where it shows like some guy back in the time where they would use compasses and look at the stars to navigate, they've got the compasses. That's what we're talking about with the geometry. And like the lines, when you see the lines particularly, like that's accredited to John Dee. And John Dee is said to have trained many of Britain's finest navigators in terms of how to go and navigate. And so when we then go and see, like, well, if John Dee did this and he was able to, Britain was one of the reasons why they were said to go from being this tiny, impoverished nation 100 years behind the likes of Portugal and Spain in the age of discovery, and then they became the biggest and greatest of all time, is because they had expert navigators. And they were expert navigators because of what Johnny Dee was teaching them. So John Dee goes and he teaches the navigators whatever he teaches them. So that being said, John Smith came to, or at least the navigators on their ships, they brought him to Jamestown. I think they also brought him to Roanoke Island, and those guys all learned to go, and very possibly were told where to go by John Dee, because he's the one who trained them. And he's the one who had the vision of the British Empire. He's the one who's telling them where to go. My sense is that there's a connection. There's a connection to the language of the Gaelic, between like the Susquehanna River being like taught. They put that name to the oldest river on the planet. That I think they knew exactly where they were going. They started right there because they knew that. Now, it's possible that they did it because they were being guided by something else. That's possible as well. But I think that there was more knowledge. I think that it was more knowledgeable than just purely like maybe riding a larger wave.
Now, this all ties into the ushering in of a new age, and, you know, kind of bringing forth of their idea of, I guess, you know, what they want to see our world become. Is that accurate of what you would say this establishment kind of represents?
Oh, that's a big question. So, so the simple answer is yes. Yes, I think that's what happens. And arguably there are multiple factions, maybe even competing to do that. But there's a level of reality which we all live in. You know, there's the part of us which is just like, you know, regular human beings. We keep calendars. You know, we live in a system which was created by other people, and the people who created those systems have never stopped being in control. And so there's a level of reality in the most literal sense, like whether it's creating calendars or creating the Federal Reserve. There are meta programs, and there are people who run the meta programs, and that's just, you know, it's a fact of nature. And then those people get their direction from somewhere else, and where that goes, that's another conversation. But yes, there are people, and it is never stopped of controlling the general story of life on Earth to match the story of the heavens, or at least their interpretation. So that being said, the end of the age, if you will, you know, that's the time of the apocalypse, this when the revelation occurs. That is the turning of the precession of the equinoxes, and we're said to be moving into the age of Aquarius, and that's, you know, based upon a whole bunch of astrological stuff. I've tried to verify some stuff myself, and I've always struggled, and I've come to different conclusions because of that, because it doesn't seem so exact. But anyway, this is the general time, or at least this is the story which is being told. And so if you want to understand what the age of Aquarius is, you go and you look at the archetypical qualities associated with Aquarius. The simplest way to do that is just like, you know, read simple astrology. What's an Aquarius sun sign like? And you can begin to see some of the qualities associated, and just imagine applying that to an age, a 2,000-year period. So Aquarius is often known for the group, the collective, humanity. It's like, you know, it's the big family, but it's collective. And so that can be expressed 1,000 billion different ways. And one of these ways which we're seeing it is through the global culture of globalism. And arguably, where did globalism begin? It began at Jamestown. It began with the British Empire. Globalism is a byproduct. If you think about globalism with a capital G, with McDonald's on every corner in every country, you know, that's a byproduct of the British Empire. You know, that's the infrastructure. That's globalism. But it is a reflection of the age of Aquarius. That is an expression of it. Like, it may be an inverted expression of it, but it's an expression nonetheless. So the second thing in Aquarius is it's known about innovation. And so innovation means like new ways of doing things. And so one way which that is expressed, or the way which we're seeing it in our reality right now, most obviously, is computer technology. So this is the time of technology. This is time of innovation. Computer technology is just one expression, but it's an expression nonetheless of Aquarian qualities. And so where did the computer industry begin? It began right where the Chesapeake Bay transitions to the Susquehanna River. So going back to physical reality, so it's like river, 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 and then it changes. It's like there's a spot where it goes from like river to estuary. That's what the bay is. It's an estuary, but it's always connected. That place is known as Havre Grace, Maryland, is on one side, and the other side is Aberdeen. And there is a military base there, Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And Aberdeen Proving Grounds is where the world's first electronic general programmable computer. This is where the computer industry began. You'll see, like, you know, when you see historical markers, it's like, this is where it began, because this is where it began. It's military industrial complex, computers from the very beginning, and it's located right at the place where the bay transitions to river. So where the bay transitions from bay to ocean, that's where we find Jamestown. Where the bay transitions to compute from bay to river, that's where we find the first computer. So we have the first instance of globalism. Now we have the first instance of computers located in these very, very key geological places on this river. And by the way, the name of the computer, it's known as the electronic numerator integrator arithmetic computer, something like that, but that no one could ever remember that. So they always called it by its acronym. And its acronym is known as ENIAC, like Enochian, like John Dee. John Dee is Enochian magic, or at least he's tied to it. He's the father of Enochian magic. We haven't even talked about that story, but it's very, very important. So I just want to go to the third part, which is, and again, this is just beginnings of such a deep, deep story. But if you go further up the river, there's a confluence there where two branches come together, and they're very, very big branches. They're of equal size. So there's known as the West Branch and the North Branch. But that's the next key geological, most definite example. If you were to look at this like from a satellite or from like a spaceship, if you will, you would be able to see like that's a clear marker. That's where the big rivers come together. That's where it changes shape, and this is where it goes in the ocean. Like it's going to be very, very clear. And where we have these, it looks like a Y. You have two branches coming together to form a third. And there we find the third instance of Aquarius symbolism, and that is electricity. Aquarius is always known to be very electric. It's ruled by Uranus. That's lightning bolts. That's what, like, you know, those two squiggly lines for Aquarius are. They're two lightning bolts. And so right where those rivers meet is where Thomas Edison built his first power plant and building, wired with 3-wire electrical distribution. So when you think about that, there's like many, many ways which electricity could be transferred. I mean, Tesla was working on an entire thing of wirelessly. I mean, we know that is just as possible. It was just as it was known back then. There was no need, or it was not like this is the only way that 3-wire electrical distribution, positive, negative, and neutral, the standard way of delivering electricity, this is where it began. This is the world first of 3-wire electrical distribution. It's the world first of the computer industry. It's the world first of globalism. On the oldest river, which they named after the what I'm going to tell you is the tutelatory spirit. The river is the conclusion, which only makes sense, and we'll get to why later, is that the river is the tutelatory spirit of the planet. And that's why it was done there. That's why they began there. And that's why they were able to succeed the way they were, is because they put it under its control with a magical ritual. That is the nature of Enochian magic. I'm not saying Enochian magicians are bad people or good people. I'm just saying if you read the John Dee stories, and if you go and you look at the history of what has happened, it is Enochian magic in action, and it is carrying itself to modern times. Like, you know, that's what CERN is. That's what it's when we'll get to that in a moment, but it's this one continuous kind of ritual, if you will. It's got multiple purposes, but one of it is it's time to the turning of the ages, as told in the heavens, to the turning from the age of Aquarius, or the age of Pisces, into the age of Aquarius. And so that's what it was about. And it stretches over a 400-year period. I mean, I say right now we're in the 100-year transition. There are all of these different things going on simultaneously, but that was the key magical ritual.
Now, you mentioned the 400-year cycle. The 400th anniversary was a big deal as well, big enough for the Queen to come visit. Is that right?
Exactly. So if we can go and look, the British Empire was conceived under the rulership of Queen Elizabeth I, and it was impregnated, if you will, by John Dee. It manifested, it gave birth at Jamestown. The date of Jamestown's founding was May 14th, 1607. So 400 years, and there's a map. We didn't even talk about the map, but there's a map. Or yeah, I did. I talked about it for a moment. There's a map where the river's name comes from. There's also a hidden code in the map, and the hidden code is the 40th parallel of the Susquehanna River. And we can talk about that later, but I just need to tell you that because it's very significant to the 400th anniversary. So if that's the hidden location, on the 400th anniversary, and 400 is significant because from a Kabbalistic perspective, 400 means completion. So 400th year anniversary, Jamestown had their 400th anniversary. And it was a big enough deal that the Bush family came to it, like a whole bunch of like important people in Washington, D.C. came to it. And the sitting monarch of the British Empire came to it. Queen Elizabeth II began underneath Queen Elizabeth I, and Queen Elizabeth II was sitting on the throne for the 400th anniversary, and she came to Jamestown. You know, the Queen doesn't just travel very easy. She came for this reason. There's something kind of dark about it. If you like the darkness, we could go to it about Queen Elizabeth. But what's significant is, on that exact day that they had that 400th anniversary weekend in Jamestown, it was May 12th, 2007. On the exact location of the 40th parallel at the Susquehanna River. So that is the location in the John Smith map. So it's linked to the beginning of Jamestown. There is a physical link. So in that physical location, at that exact moment, the same day the Queen is down there, sitting at that hidden location, the 40th parallel, were a bunch of people, and they opened up a brand new park. And that park is literally at 40 degrees, 0 minutes, 6 seconds from this imaginary line we call the 40th parallel. That equates to about 600 feet. There are 70 miles from like the 40th degree to the 41st degree. And this is 600 feet away from it, and it's a quarter mile from the river. And that park, if you were to go and look at it from Google Earth, what you're going to see is it's in the shape of a crescent moon and sun, the ancient alchemical symbol, which is used and tied directly with the Rosicrucians, which John Dee, you know, the father of this British Empire, was said to be the Grand Master of. And that's, again, we're still just reading the preface.
You mentioned a map and the 40th parallel, and there was something having to do with that you were going to talk about.
Well, that's the thing. That's the map. The map says that there's a code. So the map is tied to John Smith, but I don't think John Smith wrote it. Francis Bacon is the hand behind it. Francis Bacon he's connected very, very heavily. We can go down that path if we'd like to. But the technique known to Francis Bacon, and he was the final editor of the King James Bible, and he's thought by many people to be the true author of Shakespeare. All of these works are filled with codes. That was the style of the day. Steganography and ciphers. And so within that map, which ties directly to Francis Bacon, is a code. And using the techniques described in Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages. You're familiar with that work? So, like, you know, I've had that book for years. I never actually read it because, like, I mean, have you ever actually read it, like picked it up and read cover to cover? It's not like, you know, it's not written that way. But I've had it for years. And then as soon as I started seeing these connections between the map and Francis Bacon, and I had enough of a background of esoteric societies and symbolism and all sorts of stuff, I'm like, all right, I got to dig deeper. And I start looking at Manly P. Hall's book. And all of a sudden, this book, which was gathering dust on my bookshelf, was like the most valuable, important thing I've ever seen. And I'm reading it, and it was like, before it was so dry and I couldn't get through it. And it was I couldn't get to the next page faster, because what it was doing was it was describing the known methods of Francis Bacon's style of steganography, of hiding secret messages in public documents. And so, though it does not talk about the map, it talks about the modus operandi, the style. And so I'm looking at the map, and the most obvious thing, and this is where it all began, is on the very top of the map, there are markers for latitude, excuse me. And so latitude is an east-west line. The parallel, or the equator, is a latitude. It's 0 degrees latitude, and then goes up and down to to 90 degrees. And so there's like 90 degrees north and 90 degrees south. So when I say 40 degrees, it's the 40th parallel, like the 40th equator. And so there are latitude markers on the top of this map. That's very normal. That's how latitude has been able to be accurately calculated for thousands of years. And so there it says 37, 38, 39, 40, 41. But if you look closely, you don't even have to look that closely, you'll see that the 40 isn't just backwards, it's mirrored. And so that has, immediately when I saw that, I was like, all right, well, what does Google got to tell me about that? And Google got nothing to tell me. I was like, how does it not have anything to say? And so it was from there that I began to see that mispaginations, purposefully misnumbering, was a technique. And then when you look at the map, there is like, it's fascinating. Like if you like maps, this thing is like Indiana Jones. You can recognize it's filled with information. There are X's all over it. And then the biggest, most obvious visual picture, it's a map or visual image. It's a map. It's about like, Pennsylvania, New York, and Maryland and all this sort of stuff, Chesapeake Bay. But the most significant image is that of a Susquehanna warrior. And it's got this really strange phrase written underneath the warrior's feet. And it says, the Susquehannocks are a giant-like people and thus attired. What the hell does that mean? And why is that on a map? I mean, I'll tell you what I think it means. That's like green language. It's code. Like it on one level, it's meaningless. It says they're giant-like. So the Wikipedia definition is, oh, they're very tall because they lived on the river and they ate fish. And it's like, well, what about all the other people that lived on the river and ate fish? Were they not tall? And then giant-like, and giant has such a significant meaning. Like you could go down the line of like, oh, there were like literal giants living all throughout the North America when it was first colonized. Or you could go down to like, no, the giants of the Nephilim. And maybe they're one and the same. I don't know. But like we're dealing with a charged word tied to charged individuals. And then it says, if we're taking it literally, these are big people, and then they and thus attired. This is how they dress. This is how they act. And so it's like they're big people and they dress like big people, or they act like big people. And so that's poetic. It's meant to be interpreted many, many different ways. And so regardless of like what that may mean, I just want to go down that path because it's so fascinating. And the image of the Susquehannock, I mean, if you look at any other picture of a native person from that time, you will always see them, and this is true with like what you look today. It's like there's a very straight hair, and the Susquehannock warrior has this flowing curly hair. I'm like, that doesn't look like you're taught. You're communicating something different, and and the Susquehannock warrior is also dressed in cryptic Freemasonic attire. Like if you know what Freemasonic regalia looks like, the warrior is wearing an apron, with a curved apron with a folded top, and it's fringed, and there's a collar and a jewel around its neck. You'll usually see on imagery of native life during that time of a lot of wear on the neck, but it tends to be beadwork. It tends to be thin. And then it has this warrior, or at least it's being positioned with wearing this very, very like heavy duty, like it's a shrunken wolf's head, I assume it's shrunken. And then it's done with this heavy collar, which is very, very similar to the Freemasonic collar and jewel, where the jewel is an indicator of rank. If you're a Freemason, you wear a collar and jewel. The jewel tells the world something about who you are and what you do, or the rank you're at. And so this is very significant. And so this warrior is like, all of these signs is like, this warrior is very, very significant, very significant. And the warrior's name is a Susquehanna. Now, the truth is, we don't know what those people called themselves. We know that they went by many, many different names. The French called them the Andaste. The Swedes called them the Minqua. The Conestoga, that's associated with them also. It's like, and we don't know what they called themselves, but the name that was given to them that is stuck through history is the Susquehanna. And that came from this map. I mean, it's possible that, like, whoever John Smith's guide was, assuming it's John Smith, I don't think it was. I think it was probably Francis Bacon or some other, maybe an explorer, because Bacon wasn't known to be that much of an adventurer, but maybe that's besides the point. When you begin to go and you look, when you begin to understand the style of communication which was used by the people who were behind the map and used by the people who established so much of our reality, everything is meant to be read on many different levels. So that being said, we see its name is Susquehanna and the river's name is Susquehanna, like they're connected. And so one of the techniques which is used within the as expressed within the mainly P. Hall's work is like, it's the use of double entendre. Like, I say one thing, but it's got multiple meanings and it means something else. So when we see this Susquehannock warrior with this flowing hair, like a flowing river, like the Vedic culture, and Vedic culture has a very strong similarity to Celtic culture. They worshipped rivers as divinity as well. They're the holy rivers of India, and their gods were portrayed with flowing hair. And it's said that the rivers were formed from their hair. I'm like, you go and you see the Susquehannock warrior, it's the same sort of stuff. So that being said, when I'm seeing the picture of the warrior, that is also, it's an indication of the river because they're one and the same. And that's how the Susquehannas and the Susquehanni, those were the people that followed the Susquehanna, that worshiped the river and lived there, just like the Susquehannocks and the Susquehannas, the Susquehanna being, the Seine. We're seeing this pattern. And so when I was looking at the map and I knew that, and I realized, like, if there's going to be a code in a map, like, what are you going to tell? If there's going to be a secret message, it's pragmatic. And so what it's going to say is going to be a location. And so the interpretation I take from the map is that we've got the reverse 40. It's like, this is very obvious. There's the mirrored 40. Like, this is subjective, or this is objective. This is clearly something you should be paying attention to. And then all eyes go to this Susquehanna warrior with all of this, like, signage, each with like a different piece of information, but it's also saying, like, and the Susquehanna River. And if you take those as like coordinates, as cross references, it's pointing to a location. And it would make sense also because if you were to come to a new uncharted land, there's not like a marker. You can't say, like, you don't have GPS, you can't say a street name, but you can use something such as a large river, which can be identified, and then a cross section, a latitude. And so the park, which I told you about with the alchemical symbol that opened up on 400 years to the exact day as Jamestown, and they had their opening ceremony the same day Jamestown had their Queen Elizabeth II ceremony, that is literally located at the location which is identified in the map. So when you begin to go and you look, you can see, like, so from the very beginning, Pennsylvania is a strange colony. So we're going to talk colonies. All the colonies were different. They had different, like, people were funding them, and they had different qualities. And Pennsylvania was known as like the place where all the wackos would go. It was the holy experiment. And what it did was anyone who had a spiritual or religious belief and was persecuted for it, they would come to Pennsylvania. And so without getting into, like, who they were and what that means, just, like, think about that. Like, you're going to go and leave the world, the land that you live, to go across a sea and go and live in a colony. There are a lot of people that stayed and only some went. So for whatever reason, the people that went, they had to have something that was going to drive them. And then from that, they can go and look and think about all the different colonies, be like, oh, I could go here because this is where these people are, and I go there, and this is known for that, and like all these different things. And the people who want to go to Pennsylvania were, You know, they were the people who like wanted to have an expression of their spiritual self, and not have any sort of repercussion. And all of that came from William Penn. And so there's a lot we can read into William Penn, but we know that that's kind of tied with him. That's where you get Pennsylvania. And so where did William Penn want to live? He wanted to live at the 40th parallel in the Susquehanna. There's a small river that meets at that spot. It's known as the Conestoga River. The Conestoga River, in like physical reality, we find the largest collection of petroglyphs, of rock carvings found east of the Mississippi. And it really, there's a huge collection like right at that place. And then going down from the stretch from there to the Chesapeake Bay, which is probably like maybe 50 miles. And the river drops really, really like sharply along the way. There are a bunch of spots where there are found petroglyphs, and this is the highest concentration. This area is like basically ignored by archaeologists. Like that in itself should be interesting, but it's ignored. Like this was like the epicenter. The Susquehannocks, they were real people. They were like the biggest, baddest MFers at the time. Like this was like, there was a lot of warring going on between the different tribes, and the most dominant was the Susquehannocks. So in a very kind of like tough part of the world, like the toughest guys were the Susquehannocks, and they get to choose anywhere they want to live. That's where they chose to live. You know, before they only lived here for like 400 or 500 years. They've been completely wiped out. There's no, there's, you know, who they were and what they were. Like, they're written about in the utmost respect by in the John Smith book. There's a book that accompanies the book, the map. It's known as I think it's called The True Relations of the General History of Virginia. And for the most part, like, he doesn't have many positive things, you know, to say about the people that were living in what we're calling America. And, you know, the word he used was savages. You know, the savages did this and the savages did that. He was able to form good relationships with the people that were living there, but he spoke about it like almost like it was condescending more than anything else. But when he got to the Susquehannocks, he was like, these are the most magnificent people I've ever met. Doesn't really explain why, other than the fact that he says like they're majestic in their size and their appearance. But so this is where they lived. This is where the North won the Civil War. Like, quite literally, the Battle of Gettysburg is where the South was winning the Civil War, and then the North came back and they turned the tide, and they eventually won the war. And what's generally credited to that was the Battle of Gettysburg. So the South comes up, and they were like just dominating. And then they go to Gettysburg. They're like, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to turn right, and we're going to cross the Susquehanna River, and then we're going to invade Philadelphia and go all the way up to New York. And so that's what they're doing. And they were having their way. And then they come to the Susquehanna River at the 40th parallel at the town of Wrightsville. And then Wrightsville and the Columbia, Pennsylvania, and the Wrightsville people, they went and they burnt the bridge. This was the longest covered bridge on the planet at the time. And they lit it on fire, and they burned it down, and there was like a one-day battle, a skirmish. And then the South Army was like, all right, we can't cross this river now. And they're like, let's go back to Gettysburg and like come up with our new plan. So they go back to Gettysburg, and Gettysburg happens, and the North wins that. They were supposed to lose. They were supposed to lose the war or that battle. They were outnumbered, and there was a hero who was able to hold off the South until the North got their reinforcements, and then everything changed. So there are 2 points I want to make right here. One is, if it wasn't for the battle at the 40th parallel, that small little like skirmish, Gettysburg would have never have happened. Something else would have happened. We would have gone on a different timeline. If you like to think about things like timelines, and like, you know, where like there's a major point where you could have gone this way or that way. This was that point. It had a major implication on what eventually became the entire expression of the world. But that happened at this point. Um, so I want to go back to Gettysburg. The guy who is said to be the hero for the North that day was a gentleman by the name of Abner Doubleday. And so Doubleday's got two distinct sort of, well, he's got three, I guess. He's got a bunch of things. Doubleday is one of these guys who, like, there's a lot of really interesting things tied to him. So the Baseball Hall of Fame is located at in Cooperstown, New York. And Cooperstown, New York is literally 500 feet from the beginning of the Susquehanna River, like the oldest river, all the stuff we're talking about. This also happens to be where the Baseball Hall of Fame is located. And the reason why the Baseball Hall of Fame is located is because it's said that Abner Doubleday invented the game, and he invented the game right there in Cooperstown. So now we've got this like other connection between like this guy Abner Doubleday and the Susquehanna and the 40th parallel, and now the source of the river, But there's another piece of Abner Doubleday's history. It turns out that he didn't invent baseball. It's known as the Doubleday myth, and it's kind of like just laughed upon. But what is true about Doubleday is Doubleday was the president of the Theosophical Society. So if you're familiar with H.P. Blavatsky, she was the founder of the Theosophical Society, and the Theosophical Society has had an enormous influence by introducing Eastern concepts to a Western mind on a mass scale. Like they're the ones, like so many things which we understand through the spiritual world comes from this organization, and H.P. Blavatsky is pretty well known. So she lived in New York, and then she left New York and she returned to India, and she all sorts of controversy and was tied to her. But when she left, like the Theosophical Society, or at least the U.S. branch, did not disappear. And so they had a president of this large-bodied organization, and who replaced H.P. Blavatsky, but Abner Doubleday. And so now we're beginning to understand that there is this, it changes names, but there is a continuation between these kind of like heroes, like John Smith. If you go and read his bio, or you watch the Disney tale, like his story reads like it does read like a Disney story. Like the Pocahontas adventure is just one chapter in a very adventure-filled life. And then we've got like Abner Doubleday, Benjamin Franklin. He is completely tied to the area. There's a 3-college alignment based around this park. It's in a perfect T-square alignment spread out over 20 miles. Colleges built, some of them a couple hundred years apart, and they all connect back to Benjamin Franklin and his secret society, the American Philosophical Society. The American Philosophical Society. It's a kind of a secret society, so that's probably not exactly the right word. I went down a few tangents. I'll pause for a moment to let you.
Oh, no worries. It's fascinating stuff. Now, you had briefly mentioned earlier that there is a darker aspect to all this. Now, when it comes to that, the people in very high levels of control, they know how to manipulate the nature of reality. They know how to do that in order to steer the masses. At least that's what I believe. So that being said, they can do anything from, I guess, staged events to fake shootings or real shootings, or however they're going to do this, is as some sort of mass ritual to steer society. I've seen this over and over. And is this something that you see? And is this also, tied to, I guess, what they want to see happen in our future, what they're going to be ushering in, everything like that?
So that's a great question. I think by now that what we can say, at least with 100% certainty, is that the stories that are put out are very much demonstrating that what you said is a truth, that there is an elite and they live by some ancient ways, which would be surprising to like the typical man on the street. And I don't think that, I think that's completely true. And the position I generally hold is we have been, we've been kept from a true connection with this environment which we live in. I don't know what the environment is. I'm open to a lot of possibilities, but I'm saying like I don't know, but I recognize I'm in an environment. And because it's been for however long, like we're disconnected, but we can go and see that there are people who are still connected. They're also the people who control the mechanisms which allow someone to be disconnected. Like that's what calendars do. The calendars quite literally frame a context of reality, which is, you know, it's based around a calendar. If you didn't have that, you'd be something else, for better, for worse. So that being said, there are many types of techniques, but ritual is a big part of it. And ritual has always been a big part of it. And there are some rituals which are, which take human life. And there are some rituals that don't. Some that do it very publicly, some that do it very privately, you know, all this sort of stuff. And so as it relates to this story, so I'll talk about some which are metaphoric and some which are literal. I'm going to suggest that the entire, are you familiar with what I mean, or do you know what I mean when I say the lost colony of Roanoke? You know that part?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to suggest that whole thing's a ritual. And we know that primarily because it's the birth of Virginia Dare. So Virginia Dare was said to be the only person who lived, who survived the lost colony. And where did they go? They went exactly where John Dee told them to go. You know, and when do you do a ritual? You do a ritual usually like you're asking for something or before something, and particularly like a blood ritual like this. And so these people went there, and what they did was they gave birth, because you're sacrificing something to get something. And so what they're doing and what they are manifesting is Virginia Dare. And so Virginia Dare immediately ties into the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth. And dare means it's a quality, it's a boldness, it's like to go forward. And it's tying in these like energies into a person to go forward. And not just a person, it was a woman, it was a girl. And she is said to be the first person born in the colonies. And she's the only one to survive the lost colony of Roanoke. And there are countless of legends, but primarily she was raised by the wilderness. And she was like this kind of like magical, mythical person. And so think about that symbolically. So that was the magical operation, and that was the ritual. And maybe it was all done just like metaphorical. Maybe there were, you know, but this is what it is. And so also we have tied in the woman in the wilderness. And so the first known Rosicrucian outer Rosicrucian colony in the New World was known as the Society of the Woman of the Wilderness. It was led by Johann Kelpius in what was Philadelphia, and then they moved to Lancaster, which is right at the 40th parallel, you know, all that stuff. But we again see this connection of the woman in the wilderness, and it has a Revelations connection as well, because that also ties to the book of Revelations, which connects to the turning of the ages. This period, what began there was like the beginning of this 400-year moment to where we are right now. So that would be one sacrifice, and that's metaphorical. Now I'm going to tell you a literal one. So Queen Elizabeth comes. She arrives at in America to come to Jamestown, and it was like a 1-month stay, and it was a workup until she went to the peak experience, which was, or the crowning experience, which was the 400th anniversary. And so before that, she went to, like, you know, New York or what have you, and then she was going to go to Churchill Downs to see the Kentucky Derby, because thoroughbred horse racing is very, very significant on a certain level of reality and class. And so just as she was doing that, and that's located in Lexington, Kentucky, is right at the fire ritual date, you know, right around, I think it was like April 17th, was the Virginia Tech massacre. If you can remember, this was back in a time when there was not an inundation with the mass shootings, where it was still in the collective consciousness, very, very raw and new. And it was 33, there were 33 deaths in that, and it was in Virginia, and it was right where the Queen was. You know, it was a marker. And then the rest of her trip was going through Richmond and bringing the energy of the mourning nation. The entire nation was mourning, because these were like, we'd never seen anything like this before. And what was the most interesting story of the day? It was Queen at the 400th anniversary. You know, Today Show, like, it's been building up. They've been following the Queen here. Like, you know how like the Today Show does it. They did the same thing. And so the nation's energy, the focus of all the folks who are watching this and all worked up, and they're putting their energy on the Queen, and they're like thinking about the beginning of Jamestown, and they're doing all this sort of stuff. And there's your ritual. It's no different than like the Middle Ages, when you were forced to go to Mass. It was all in Latin. You didn't know what it was, but you had to go and look up, and you had no idea what you're watching. Same thing. These people have no idea what they're watching. There's another ritual, and here's the other ritual. This one is totally symbolic. So one of the ways the Civil War came to an end was through the popularity of baseball. And so what baseball, and the sport has always been very, very significant within statecraft. You know, whether it's like the Greeks and the Olympics, and like the Romans and the gladiators, or the Mayans and the Aztecs and the ball court, you know, sport is very, very significant within statecraft and the hierarchical management of a lot of people. And baseball is the national pastime. What's pastime? It's the eternal. You know, baseball is it doesn't have a clock. And so Baseball Hall of Fame, that's why it's so significant that it's located up where it is, at the source of the river, or at least the Hall of Fame, or the Ascended Masters. That's a word we get from the Theosophical Society. This is the home of the Ascended Masters, because from an esoteric and an occultic perspective, all of these sports are representations of life, you know, of different ways. But baseball, you know, there's all sorts of stuff. Like, you know, you got the phallic symbol, and you're standing on the mound, you're throwing the egg, and like home run, and all of like the 1950s kind of like sayings, which had like sexual innuendos. It's like baseball is that. It's a symbol of that. It's a metaphor of that. And every year, there's a National Hall of Fame induction weekend. And each year they go and they induct a handful of players into like the best of the best who ever play this game, which is simple. Oh, I didn't even tell you how the Civil War, I just got away from it. So to go back to that, the Civil War generals were the guys who were behind all the baseball becoming real. They were the original owners of all the teams. It was all of these young men. They were like tired of war, but they like, it was something camaraderie. It was a way to compete, but it was healthy, and it was not a way to kill. And so when we begin to see, this is how you bring it down. You know, whether that was done consciously or not, that's what it does. And Abner Doubleday, we know, is very significant. Not only is he known as the hero of Gettysburg, he's also said to have fired the first shot. You know, ridiculous like mythologies. But anyway, so baseball is tied to him. It's on the top of the river, and they do their ritual, the Baseball Induction Hall of Fame. You know, all these people coming in, and they're every year they're very excited. They're seeing all of their heroes. It's a very positive. It's focused on this one point. And when does that occur? it always occurs on like the first Sunday of August, or the first weekend in August, maybe the last weekend of July. That's when it happens. It's usually the first weekend. And it coincides very directly with the midpoint between the summer solstice and the autumnal equinox, the ancient holiday of Lammas. And so we begin to see at each of the branches, there is a major national holiday, usually a very, very positive feeling, which occur on or around one of the ancient dates, one of the ancient holiday dates. We have the National Groundhog's Day at Puxatawney, Pennsylvania, which happens on February 2nd, the midpoint, or Candlemas, or I can't think of the Celtic name. And then we also have the NATO, which is another term for Otan, and that happens on May Day. There's a NATO festival down there. And those are rituals, and they're always feeding the river. And that's not to say like all of the stuff which is happening behind closed doors, and we haven't even talked about the computers yet.
Let's get to that. Let's get to the computers and where that's, where this is leading to.
All right. So it's pretty clear that computers are it's clear that we live in an inverse culture. What I mean by inverse, it's an upside down reflection of a truth. And computers and the computer industry most definitely is that. All of the things which I believe computers show us are capable. Like, imagine go back in time like 1,000 years ago to all these different points and all these different cultures, and you try to describe the internet, assuming you could speak their language. You try to tell them this idea of the internet. Yeah, like you can't use the word internet. It's like the password game. That's the one word. But you're talking all about the internet. You're trying to describe it. And you realize you can't do that. Like you're trying to be like, oh yeah, you take a picture and you could send it to someone across the world. And they're like, well, what do you mean the world? And it's like, but right now, if you went and tried to go and describe like, oh yeah, about email, like everyone's going to know. Everyone's got the same image of their mind. Like people may come up with, oh, it's like a bird and it's got a message, but like everyone's on the same page. And so there's a truth to that. But I just think that the way the internet and the computer industry is an inversion of that. And I can say that with an objective truth. And that's because you can understand the essence of anything by looking at its foundation. And so we can take that literally and we can take that metaphorically, but literally the very act of creating a computer, like everything from like having to get the rare earth minerals and like what that does to the environment. Like that's not a good thing to do to the environment. Like, without, it's just not. And then looking at like all of the slave labor which is involved with it, all of everything, like it's inherently not good. And then we begin to go and look at where was it born? It was always born with warfare. It's inherently tied to something destructive, metaphorically. And we can look at computers now. I mean, they affect us. They're rather ironic. We're on computers. Like this is a truth. We should be able to communicate this easily, but we're so disconnected that this is what we're working with. But the computers have been, the first computer was introduced in 1945. There's some earlier versions, but that's the birthplace of the computer industry, and that's ENIAC. And we are moving, if you're just paying attention, you could go and look at our trajectory leading up to us and look at everything which we're going. We're moving into this technical singularity future. Like, people are moving from like Homo sapien to Robo sapien to just like robot to like, it's all the same. That's happening. This is what it looks like. It's happening faster. Things, maybe you think it's a good thing. I don't know, but it's happening. My sense is I don't think it's a good thing because of the foundation, but I think that it's pointing at a higher truth. And I think the higher truth is there's something happening. There really is. I mean, no matter how you want to go and describe it, if you're alive in a physical body on Earth right now, you're experiencing changes that are unique. Just from like the foods we eat, what's in the atmosphere, the technology, and it's moving us towards a direction. And this all began with this Enoch. And then when we begin to go and look at the history of computers, and you have that lens, it begins to like, oh, okay, it's the same sort of Enochian magic. Not exactly like the literal definition with like the table and the calling of the watchtowers, as much as it is the byproduct of the work that was done by John Dee at the beginning of this magical ritual.
Now, do you think that they're trying to, I guess, create what you would call a singularity, just to such a technical age, to the point to where we're not even human anymore. We're just something completely different.
So that's undoubtedly already happened. We don't recognize it when we're in body, like sitting as a regular person sitting right here. You don't know it because it's like boiling frog syndromes, but like you're completely different than your grandparents and completely different than your great-grandparents, just by like, the multi-generational effect of vaccines. Like there's an effect like 3 generations down the road. This is the reason why scientists have like, they have lab rats, is because they want something where they can see multiple generations very quickly. And so like all of this is changing us, the food we're eating. And they have DNA impacts, and then that's not even talking into like the whatever's happening on the electromagnetic level. It's we're going through something right now, and I think it's an inversion. It's an inversion. I don't really know where it goes or what it's doing, but what my focus is the present moment. It's like, well, okay, what's happening right now? What am I experiencing with my real eyes? And then, what am I learning from the computer box? And trying to justify, like, I'm not saying it's not real. I'm just saying like, it's coming from a box. I don't know where it's coming from. And then looking at what was done and trying to go and find the keys to interact with our environment. When I say that, I just mean Earth. Find the ways of like living which are not the inversion of the universal truth, which we're seeing. Like, we should be able to connect. We should be able to send information. We should be able to access anything. Well, how do I know that? Because the internet is here. I know that's an inversion. And I know that it's a reflection of something that's true, because otherwise it wouldn't be in existence. But I know that this isn't the right way, but it's pointing. And so that's what the focus I try to do. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I don't understand the world we live in. But what I can understand is my exact moment. And so from that, I can navigate. And so I said in the beginning of our conversation was like, this is the end of my stay here. So I know from my own personal markers, I'm going into another space right now, literally and metaphorically. And I'm looking around at people in my life, and I'm seeing like some pretty major sort of things happening, like big, like sort of things happening. And then I'm seeing the stories which are heating up, which are being told, which are being populated or spread throughout the populace. And I'm like, yeah, there's something going on, but I don't want to define it yet. I don't want to define it yet.
Now, that being said, there is always a portion of the population that is put off by magic and rituals, and they think it's evil. But whether they like it or not, we interact with this on a daily basis. It is part of our lives. I believe it's part of our reality. And I think we, like you said, we have to get back to this. We have to get back to knowing how to interact with our reality, getting back to knowing the nature of it. Because in a way, we can basically create our own reality the more we get to know the nature of it, wouldn't you say?
I think that's exactly it. I think like, so the word magic, magic has all sorts of different connotations, right? And it can mean different things. It can be positive, it can be all these different sort of things. But magic is just like the blanket term for all of the ways which you are supposed to interact with your environment. And so it's got like this, oh, it's something else. Oh, it's this, but that's what it is. And it just it's like how I said earlier, like there's a body of water which has been flowing longer than any other. And it starts here and it turns into this enormous estuary. We call it Susquehanna, but it's something else before the name. And this thing that we call magic is that. And it is mysterious in terms of like, we don't quite understand what it is, but what we can do is understand how to interact with it better. And what I believe the whole significance, there are the two things about understanding the Susquehanna mystery. One is it gives some context of, we really do live in what we're calling a magical world, but it's like we're living in a world that works like that. And there are people who know how to do that. So they know how to do that. And they've created a system. They've created a system which retards the ability for a Homo sapien to do the same. And so that's as simple as like a calendar system or a specific type of calendar system that frames the brain, like the way you process information in a certain way. That's just the nature of a meta program. It's not a good nor bad, but that's what it does. But its effect is, it's made it more, the people who you were describing earlier, it's made it even more, it's made it difficult to see the truth of our reality. And so they can't see it. They got like a negative connotation. So they're walking around and they don't know what's going on. And they've got, and all of us, like, we're talking on computers. This is affecting us right now. We're living in someone else's world, like it or not. But what we can do is learn how to navigate it. And there's certain universal truths that can be like these markers. And by looking at what they did on this river, which it seems to be the tutelatory spirit, or the spirit that looks over the entire planet. That's why they were able to have planetary control. Well, then what does that mean that we should be doing with our rivers or with my stream? What is that? What is that connection? What am I missing out? And to look at it from a different way, or to experience it from a different way. And what I think is happening is we're coming to a time where you're going to have to make a choice. You're going to have to make a choice of which path you're going to walk. And we're kind of at that point right now.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree 100%. We're living in amazing and fascinating times, and I get the sense that there is something big just around the corner. I don't know what it is. I get also a sense that that everyone around me is awakening to some level or degree as well.
Oh, definitely. So here's also, so this is what's interesting. So if you go and control the masses, so let's say something really big happened on December 21st, 2012, like from a spiritual perspective. But what you would do is you would create an expectation that what you're looking for is so enormous that if it's like kind of subtle, you're not going to see it. And I think that's what happened to a lot of people through the December 21st, 2012, like build up and then pass through. Like there was this, all of this like work up. And then it was like, but something happened. The world is not the same. So now we're seeing the opposite happen. There's like not really that much talk like that. Like if you were to watch mainstream, like there's not like, they're not on the news. They're saying the world is going to hell. Like that's not happening right now. But everything else is kind of saying that in the background. And people are seeing it and they're feeling it. So it's like they're not getting this like externalized like reinforcement that there's something big that's going to come. So if the inverse is true, we can feel something building. I think there's going to be something big coming. And maybe it's something as, you know, I'm going to say small now, like as an individual experience, like me moving out of my apartment, that's a really big deal. Like just from like a regular life, like whenever you move your home where you live, where all your stuff is, it's like, oh, I got to go and get my stuff together. And then you're like, oh, you know, what about my time here? And you get nostalgic and then you get excited about the next place. So there's all of that. That's a big deal for me. And so I think we can also channel it in like very grounded ways as well, because if someone without a degree of awareness does not ground it, then it's going to be grounded by the most popular message.
Very well said. And thank you so much for joining us to close tonight. Tell everyone where they can find your work. And you do also amazing starboard readings. My reading was fantastic. Tell everyone where they can get one of those as well.
Wow, we went through this fast. Well, first I want to thank you for this opportunity. And if this type of conversation, if this type of insight is interesting, there are a couple places which you can find me. So Instagram is where I have been doing a lot of information sharing over the past year, and I share information in a very different way. It's very kind of creative and artistic, and it's all sorts of different things. But I think it's a reflection of this time. But and you could go there. That's Susquehanna Alchemy at Instagram, and that's the easiest place to find me. And the Starboard sessions, I love doing Starboard sessions. They're fantastic Christmas gifts. I did a ton last year. It's the most unique astrological ceremony you're going to have, and it's going to make sense because of this Starboard. Like it's not just a bunch of talk. You'll understand what's being said, and that can be ordered at susquehannaalchemy.com and order soon if you're listening to this before the holidays, because it goes in order. So last year it took a couple months to work through, but definitely I love doing this, and I'd love an opportunity to do this reading for anyone. I record it and then I put it on a flash drive and I physically mail it to someone. And then the most new thing for me, and I'm just starting this out right now, is I'm moving to Subscribestar for where I want to share my information. Instagram was a test ground, and it's not exactly the right fit. It's not good for conveying information, but it's Instagram-y. And so what I want to do right now is so I'm doing this little raffle. So I make these amazing walking sticks right here, and What I'm going to do is I'm going to raffle it off like in December. And like, if you're a member, you know, you might get a free stick. And if there's like one member, it's going to be your free stick. But I'd like to incite, to give some sort of incentive to people to come and check out. I think there's like great stuff there. I go through the history. I do a lot of art there, a lot of cultural analysis. But then I also share personal stories, my own, and I also talk a little bit more about like astrology and different techniques, which I like to use and explore with trying to understand our reality. And
Very
that's
good.
Subscribe Star Susquehanna Alchemy. Any way you go and look on Susquehanna Alchemy, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And thank you so much. That was fantastic. I have a whole other page of stuff that we could have talked about, so I'm going to have you back on.
Sounds great. I think we just scratched the surface. I was like, now we're just getting started. So yeah, I'd love to be back on.
Awesome. Great. Well, you have an excellent night.
Thank you, Chris.